Hi, and welcome to the last of our Neon Sanctum introduction videos. Today we'll be looking at the last two card types, the player card and the NPC cards. Player cards are fairly obviously used by the player, while the NPC cards are used by the DM to represent any NPCs that they control. First up, let's explore player cards. So what is a player card? Every character in Neon Sanctum needs to have a player card. This special card is used to store some basic information. It is used when determining the turn order in combat, and also used to determine whether a character has died. When a combat starts, all players involved pass the DM their player cards. The DM then puts these together with any NPC cards, shuffles them and deals them out as a river, as shown here. This is called the initiative river. The order in which the cards are placed into the river is also the order in which player characters and NPCs will take their turns. This order remains the same for the entirety of the combat scene, and is not reshuffled each turn. Certain skill cards, traits and flaws can allow a player to move up or down the initiative river. The player card is also used to store various information. This includes the player and the player character's names, any traits or flaws that they may have chosen to take during character creation, and various stats. These stats include the character's speed, the number of action points the character currently has, the character's defense, and the final number is the number of skill points that the player character is currently worth. There is also an area the player can use to make miscellaneous notes. When a character takes damage and has no skill cards left to place in their damage deck, then they begin to die. The character is immediately knocked unconscious, and at the start of their next turn, they flip their player card face down. If the character does not receive any healing, or another player does not use a stabilize action on them, the next time the turn order reaches them, the player dies. The final element on a player card is a basic power. This power represents the last gasp attack that a player can make when they have no other options. This player is used during combat and will be explained in more detail in a later video. That's it for player cards. Next up are NPC cards. If you don't plan to be the DM in a game of Neon Sanctum, you don't need to listen to the next section. What are NPC cards? NPC cards are used by the DM during combat to represent all the enemies the player might face. Each card represents an individual NPC that's taking part in the combat, which means the DM may have many identical cards represent different yet similar NPCs. All NPC cards follow a set format, one that's similar in elements to the player card, but slightly different. The NPC card is split into three major areas: the NPC stats here, the NPC powers here, and when space allows, a small section describing the sort of tactics that NPC would normally use. Just like skill and item cards, the NPC card is color coded to show the ability area that the NPC is most proficient in. Each NPC card also has a skill, shown here, which is the skill that the NPC is most specialized in. The NPC's race is also shown here. The NPC stats are very similar to those found on the player card. We have the NPC's action points, speed, and defense. However, instead of skill points, NPCs have a health value. This is because NPCs don't have skill cards and therefore deal with damage in a different way. When an NPC takes damage, they lose points from this health pool. When it reaches 0, any subsequent damage reduces their action points, meaning that just like players, the more damage they take, the less actions they're able to perform. The NPC card contains several powers that the DM can choose to use each turn during combat. These powers are essentially simplified versions of skill cards. These powers will be covered in more depth in a later video. One of the great things about Neon Sanctum is that DMs will always have a deck of NPC cards on hand in case they ever need one. Having covered all of the different card types, that wraps up the introduction series of videos for Neon Sanctum. Thank you very much for watching. Up next we'll move on to the more complicated rules that are used during combat scenes in an introduction to combat. As usual, we'd really like it if you liked, subscribed and commented on this video, and if you want to find out more about the game, check out our Facebook and Twitter pages.